Hey everyone, this is Charlie Shrem, and you're listening to Untold Stories. This is a show where we dive deep into the lives and personal histories of some of crypto's most influential leaders and find out how the crypto movement truly came to be. Let's dive in. This podcast is presented by Blockworks Group, the only blockchain event and media production company I trust. For exclusive content and events that provide insight into the crypto and blockchain space, visit them at blockworksgroup.io. I promise you won't be disappointed. Throughout the course of this show, especially in this first season, we're extremely fortunate to have guests that have been through life experiences that have shaped the way they act, think, and why they do things. We've had guests that have been through crazy experiences like hyperinflation, growing up in Zimbabwe and having the state take everything that they own from them. And we're lucky to have an amazing guest this morning, Olga Feldmeier. Actually, it's Feldmeier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me start that again. We're really lucky to have a guest this morning, Olga Feldmeier. Olga had watched the collapse of the Soviet Union where she grew up in Ukraine. After working 3 jobs, she had enough money to to pay her way into university, which was the way it was done back then. After graduating with multiple degrees in Ukraine and in Germany, she went to work in the lion's den of the banking industry. I'm just joking. She went to work at Barclays and UBS, where she had learned a lot about what the crypto industry had needed. However, unlike most of the early crypto folk, Olga decided to engage with the government of Switzerland, and now she's known as the Crypto Queen, but really she's known as one of the pioneers of Switzerland's Crypto Valley in Zug. Now Olga is the Chief Executive Officer of Smart Valor, a Switzerland-based blockchain company that is building a decentralized marketplace for tokenized alternatives. It's very interesting because Crypto Valley is Switzerland's way of saying to blockchain companies, come work here. We will provide a place to run your companies. And today, some of the most well-known companies have been started or based their operations there, like Ethereum, Cardano, Tezos, Bitmain, Golem, and even Zappo. Speaking of Zappo, Olga, thank you for coming on the show. That's where you got started in this space, correct?
Yes, Charlie, that's right. That was back in 2015, early crypto days.
I had read somewhere that you actually you had graduated from university in Ukraine, and you were deciding that you wanted to go study in the West somewhere. You said, I want to go study somewhere, and you didn't really know where to go. You had found out that Germany was offering scholarships, but the entrance exams were in German. Let me tell you something. I took my entrance exam in English, and English is one of my first language, and I still didn't do very well. How did you do that? Did you speak German?
Well, Charlie, the funny situation I found myself in, I learned that there are scholarships and examinations are coming up in 9 months. But before then, I didn't learn any German at all. So here's a question. How do you learn German or any foreign language in 9 months to be good enough to stand the exam on macro and microeconomy?
You tell me.
Well, I kind of first had an illusion I can learn a language so fast. But then basically I figured out, no, there is no way for me to really learn to speak that. So I basically learned macroeconomy book by heart. So I knew every page, just basically 300.
If you walk into a restaurant, you couldn't even order food, but you can start explaining to the waiter the difference of macro versus microeconomics in German.
Exactly. And I was just very lucky. One of my favorite chapters was about, tools that central banks have in hand to curb inflation. And that was my favorite topic, and I learned it excellently in German. And luckily, it was oral exam, right? And in this oral exam, this German professor asked me exactly this question. And I learned it by heart, I knew all the all the details. So I was very lucky.
Would an oral exam be more difficult than a written exam?
Yeah, oral is more difficult because you need to be fast, right? You have no time to think. It's like us now speaking. It would be so much easier to write it down, huh? Yeah, but anyway, that was kind of like this is what I learned in life. It's always about being lucky a little bit, but working really hard to achieve that. And it's this combination, right? I worked really hard to know what I need to know for this exam. And then, I was a little bit lucky that best parts of my memory, this was the question, right? And then I went to, well, I was one of the three students from Ukraine that got this scholarship, right? It's 55 million people and three scholarships per year. That's sounds like luck, right?
That's like the odds of mining for Bitcoin on your laptop right now.
Exactly. So I got the scholarship. I was in Germany, and I was so happy that I could study in one of the best German universities. And when you're living in the foreign countries and you work double that hard, right? I had to work double that hard to get the degree in German university. Also, I'm not a native speaker, and well, then later I got this. The first job was at Boston Consulting Group in financial services, like BCG and McKinsey, and investment banks. That was like, like Google's and startups today. It was the best job you could get, right? Yeah, and then it was like 5 years, BCG, all banks. We were basically, buying banks, selling banks for banks, doing the strategy for banks, thinking about the future of banking, And I always laugh about that, what we thought, like what will come in 10 years back then, like we could never even dream about what we're talking about today, right? Charlie, it was all this blockchain and AI. Back then it was just like, oh, we will have more efficient processes. We will have, more specialized players. That's the future of banking, right? It was so boring. So I think we are really, really lucky, that we today live through this explosion of new technologies, also in financial services.
What do you think what do you think the banking industry really thinks about the crypto space? I mean, do you ever call up your old colleagues and say, "Hey, remember me and now I work in crypto. What do you guys think?"
Oh, totally. It's so funny. It's actually, I was part of them, right? So after BCG, I went to work for Barclays Capital in London, and later for UBS, the large bank here in Switzerland, the globally largest wealth management bank. And I still have a lot of friends, right? And sometimes we meet for a drink, or I come to visit them. It's actually funny that most people, they kind of like look at me and say they have even kind of like regret for me. They're like, oh, poor Olga, she came to work now in this crypto money laundering industry, like she will be probably soon in jail, and like how do you manage all the risks? And people, in the banks, they really think it's like it's very shady, and we have no idea what we are doing. And luckily, our bank stays out of it. This is a perception I get very often, Charlie. It's really
Olga,
funny.
do you think that they really think these things, or are they just more protecting their own livelihood?
Well, this is an opinion. Now I'm talking not as an institution, but as people, individual persons that I know, right? So this is, it's not people that are interested in a certain position of a bank. This is personal opinions. What you're mentioning, like institutions, I think yes, there is a certain competitive threat, but it's on a very strategic level that people understand it. In a strategic division or corporate strategy division. This is where people understand it. It's not CEO, it's not divisional heads, it's not people who are in business, and it's not the people that are taking shots, right? So to be honest, I don't really think that what we've seen now, that banks don't work with blockchain companies, blah blah blah. I don't think this is because of that they're afraid of us. I think we're still too small for them to be afraid of us.
Even today?
It's kind of starting to change, but if you think about it, is there any payment service that became like super big that banks should be afraid of? Probably not. Are exchanges, crypto exchanges, somehow taking away business from banks? Today, probably not, right? Are there any like really large peer-to-peer lending platform on blockchain that use crypto? Not yet, right? Whereas, in kind of like, let's call it traditional fintech disruptor, companies like Square and Revolut, they are much more real threat to banking than we are. We will be in several years' time, like probably in 3 5 years, but today we're not yet there, I guess.
Recently, I was featured on an episode of 60 Minutes. I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch it. 60 Minutes is a TV show here in the United States, and it's a staple um, of television, news magazine television. It's been around for 53 years. So even like my parents growing up had watched 60 Minutes. It's a show that's on every Sunday night. Um, and for the first time, they did a Bitcoin episode, and it recently played here on the 19th of May. And I was very fortunate to be featured in that episode. The reason I'm bringing this up is the show does 3 segments, and they do 3 different stories. And the Bitcoin story was the last one. The first story they did was about a major money laundering scandal um, from a bank. And it was very interesting. I feel like that they had done that because it prefaced the Bitcoin episode. So what had happened was they talked about a story of money laundering happening in Danske Bank, and it wasn't in the whole bank. It was one small branch, one of the smallest branch, based in Estonia. What this bank was doing was allowing people to launder money, like Vladimir Putin's cousin, from rubles into dollars. And it's very interesting because it was being done by one small branch of this pretty insignificant small bank in a country that most people have never even heard of. And the amount of money that was being laundered through this one little small branch of one little small bank was more money that the market cap of Bitcoin or that any trading volume of Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency actually happens, actually is done. It's so insignificant. And they preface the Bitcoin story with this story to show people, look, everyone says that, yeah, Bitcoin is money laundering and scam and all these different things. But here's one little story of one little bank of doing these illegal things. And if it wasn't for one whistleblower who's hiding right now, we would never even know about this.
That's impressive. That was very smart move.
I was very impressed by that. I mean, I felt that it was a very good way to explain Bitcoin because the producers knew that if they had just come out with a Bitcoin episode, this is what everyone would think about during the episode. So they just cut it out. They cut it out and gave a good comparison to fiat right before.
That's true. That's very smart move. Absolutely. You see, it's basically the same here. I come from traditional banking industry, and back then in 2015, as we were trying to get licensed here with Xapo, as you might know, I've been serving at Xapo as a commercial managing director back then. So back then it was actually for every lawyer, for everybody who is working in supervisory authorities. Like if you look at Bitcoin, well, transactions done fast outside of banking system anonymously. Like this is a perfect template for money laundering, just as such, like theoretically, right? And of course, we were back then with Xapo one of the first companies, Bitcoin companies, to get licensed here in Switzerland, or were trying to get licensed. So the way, lawyers and a lot of people in supervisory organizations, this is the way they saw us. Well, it's technology enhanced method to launder money, right? This is the first thing that popped in their mind when they were
Sure.
looking at this technology. But it's not this way, right? We know it, and we know how huge the money laundering burden on the banking side is, and how small and insignificant is a proportion of money that is used in crypto.
It's more
Uh,
about messaging. Of course, in any industry, you're going to have the good and the bad. we're not going to sit here saying that the whole banking industry is bad, because we all know that there are some good positives that we use, but we think that the crypto industry potentially is better and can do a better job, especially with more equally to different people. And so that's why we're so for it, and we're evangelizing and talking about it. But I wanted to ask you, what was it like growing up in the Ukraine?
Well, actually, at the beginning, it wasn't too bad, right? It was Soviet Union, and everybody was equal, and we had the same rights. At least, if you're a simple person, this is the way it looked to you, right?
What does that mean? You're all equal and you all have the same rights.
Well,
How did you feel that growing up?
well, there were 15 republics in Soviet Union. From Ukraine to Tajikistan, it was always the ideology that we are all equal. It doesn't matter where you come from, if you're rich or poor, we have all the same rights, right? It's a Soviet Union, it's equality and trust, and well, this communistic ideology of being a better society, right? And everybody, like simple people, everybody believed this, right? It's just very few people who understood, oh, there is another story on the back of it. There is a party and they are cooking their own own dishes and so on. Normal people didn't know that, right? And I was growing
Was
up.
this something that was taught to you in schools?
Yeah, exactly. The whole ideology, films, music, books, how they teach us history, how they even teach us foreign languages. English was taught in the way that, after 5 years at the school, you would have no idea how to speak English, right? It was actually the purpose, right? You were taught in the way so we could not learn anything because they didn't want us to listen. They didn't want us to understand what other people are saying about us, right? So this is crazy. And I was growing up with my mom. I never had a father, and my mom was a piano player. So as the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine became independent country, because all the economy, all the economic ties between two countries broke down together, Ukraine was basically bankrupt. So what Ukraine did to save the country, they started to print money massively, right? Like we had 10,000% inflation during 5 years time. And basically the salaries of people like my mother who worked for state while she played piano, they were paid like with 6 or 9 months delay. So you can imagine what 6 months delay in payment of your salary does to you with 10,000% inflation, right? So you would get a monthly salary that will be enough to buy one piece of bread, right? So that was quite extreme time, and people lost everything. People were on the street, there were people dead on the street that were lying there for several days before somebody picks them up and cleans the street. Like all this crazy things of collapse in state. um, when you see this, and especially kind of like you cannot do anything about it. Like for us, the only way to save our wealth, or not wealth, but savings, would be to buy dollar. But they said that dollars are illegal. You cannot hold any dollars, right? This is
The
illegal. This
government
is prohibited.
illegal. You could not hold any dollars. That was the government said, this currency you cannot hold.
No, because you see, nobody wanted us to get out of national currency. They wanted us all to be burned through hyperinflation to pay for the debts, right, and to pay for somehow grappling with this decomposing economy. So the only way was to go on the street to those kiosks and buy some dollars there, but you would never know if they are fake or they are real. So we once bought a dollar, but it happened that in the other place where we wanted to sell them later to buy some food, it they were fake, right? And well, it's illegal activity, all of this. So where are you gonna go? You're gonna go to police and say your dollars were fake, right? So this is like really crazy experience. And then later I became advisor, consultant, and then banker. And at some point, I became even executive director at UBS, right, in charge of Central and Eastern Europe, the whole wealth management distribution of UBS. I mean, I quite made my career in banking, but at some point, I always remembered this experience of being so let down by your government, by your state, of having so no protection, being so at the edge of basically complete deconstruction, right? And I thought to myself, wow, I made it out. I made my career. I achieved everything you can achieve here in Western world. But most of the people out there where I was before, Ukraine, Africa, Latin America, all of this, it's still the same. Nothing changed there, Charlie. Nothing. In Argentina, in Ukraine, nothing changed there. It's still the same. There are no rights. There is no protection. Even access to banking in many countries. If you have access, then it's just local banking system. How is this going to benefit you or help you to protect your wealth? No. And
How are you supposed to trade with other people around the world if you can't
exactly.
even money?
Yeah. And the worst thing is, that I figured out, well, it's not the same for everybody. It's kind of like this. If you're rich, right? In the same countries out there. If you're rich, you can come to large Swiss or offshore banks. You can open a bank account and your wealth is very much protected. If you kind of come in with, 3, 5, 10 millions, there will always be a way for you to open a bank account and protect your wealth. And a nice client advisor will come over to you. It will fly over to you wherever you are, will sit down with you in a nice restaurant and give you perfect advice how to structure your wealth so you make sure that it grows.
This
But
is the
if you
famous story, though. You need money to make money.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're not there, if you're just, Charlie, if you're just like us, like you and me, you've been entrepreneur, maybe you've done, some business successful, you have made your, I don't know, your first 300K or your 500K. Nobody wants you. Like no banks here in Switzerland will gonna open you a bank account to make sure that you can invest this money safely. They're not interested. It's just not enough money for all this trouble and cross border and advisory and so on. So this is what you see today. This banking is like very, one sided and very much oriented to rich people, high net worth, all of this Western world and rich people. But for the rest of us, there is nothing. And I think, blockchain technology came to change this, right? It came to, fundamentally change the balance of power between people and state, between startups and Wall Street. And this is the exciting thing why I believe I am absolutely on the right place on the right time.
When people say that Bitcoin and crypto is a bank in your pocket, they don't just mean being able to save money and to be able to store your wealth. By having a bank in your pocket, it gives you access to the whole banking world literally from your cell phone without needing the permission or the slow bureaucracy or the slow technology of another counterparty. And I think that is a lot more powerful than just being able to store your money. People laugh when I tell them, and I think you completely understand what I mean by this. But when I explain Bitcoin to people and I explain cryptocurrency to people, one of the first things I say, because it just comes out of my mouth, and I know that I've already lost the person, I say that I believe that Bitcoin has the ability to bring about world peace, which is a huge thing that I think we all want. We want to end wars. We want to end our government's ability to wage war. We just want to stop killing for no reason and stop hating for no reason. There's no reason for it. And I think Bitcoin in the crypto space is something that'll bring about that, because here, not just with finance, but with information, we have the ability to communicate and to transact with millions of people around the world without anyone telling us that we shouldn't or can't do that.
Yeah. So I'm totally with you, Charlie. And I used to have the same conversations. And the way to explain this is actually to say, well, look, a very simple example. If Ukraine or Zimbabwe or Argentina will start to print money, do inflation. A lot of states actually start to do inflation as a means to provide funding for wars, right? This is the way it's been done through the history. So when they start to print money to have more money to, to buy weapons and to start the war, you as a citizen today can say no. You can say no in the way that you just take this money and you buy Bitcoin or any other crypto. You just get out of their local money. And with that, they cannot push on you the burden of inflation because you're completely out, right? You're not using their money. And if you're not using their money, well, then the whole, point of this hyperinflation and the hyperinflation doesn't, it does not translate in the same impact on economy as it would be if people would have to use this currency, right?
Sure, sure.
So actually, if you see it this way, should Zimbabwe decide to have a war, all the people would say, well, we don't want it, and they just completely start to use the local currency. So guess what? Zimbabwe will not be able to have all this money and to fund the war. So I'm totally with you on this argument.
So you spoke earlier. You had a career in banking, and you achieved a point in your career that I would have never achieved, and most people can never achieve. You made it, right? And then all of a sudden, you decide to jump to this crypto industry that's young and immature, and still young and immature, and with no infrastructure or technology, or without any. These companies don't even offer health insurance. I mean, what the hell was going through your head?
Yeah, this is what my parents asked me too. Like, are you crazy? You're now on 250K at UBS and all is nice. Like, what are you doing? You're going to work for Xapo. They're not even paying you. Like, are you totally out of your head? So I had this, But Charlie, I think, I've been 10 years in banking and consulting. And, for me, coming out of Ukraine, I kind of like, as a foreigner or immigrant, you always live in the country with this chip on your shoulder that, everybody else is so much better and so much smarter and they can speak the language so much better than you. And you kind of like the first phase of your life, you're trying to prove yourself and everybody else that you're not stupid, that you're as good as everybody else, right? And you try so hard. So you go the standard path and you do this corporate career and blah, blah, blah. But at some point, you're done, right? You're done and you proved yourself and them and everybody. And then I'm fine, right? I'm fine. Now, the question is like, what should I do? What do I want to do? So for me, Charlie, that was the first time back in 2014, after probably, like 10 years into my career, for the first time, I asked myself, what do I want to do actually? And the answer was, well, I read a lot about Bitcoin, you were very famous things you guys were doing. Everybody knew this, the big crash also came up in this year. But for me, with my experience in Ukraine, I thought like, oh my goodness, wow, people would have for the first time post-national money, right? Money not governed by government. How huge is that? And from then on, it was just the question, so what can I do in this industry? And actually, it's funny. I thought I will have to go and, now change another country and go to Silicon Valley because this is where Bitcoin companies are. And I did this. I went to San Francisco and I was trying to meet people. But the result of all of this was that through the Swiss guy here, I figured out that there is a company, Xapo, and they are planning to relocate here. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't need to go to Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is coming here. That's amazing. Let's find out who that is. And I figured out, oh, okay, so there's Vences Cazares, CEO of Xapo, somewhere in San Francisco. And I just wrote him a letter. Just a very standard postal letter. I found out Security and Exchange
Like a
Commission their
physical
address.
letter or an email letter?
No,
A
letter.
physical letter or an email
Postal.
letter?
Physical.
Oh, postal.
Yeah, postal. because I figured out, in their security and exchange registration, there was a formal address of some mailbox. And I sent their a letter because I couldn't find out his email address, right?
Did you write it by hand or did you type it?
I first wrote it by hand, but then I figured out he would not be able to read it, so I typed it. Yeah, that was really funny. And then I sent the letter, and somebody told me, like, forget it. Like, CEOs of such companies, they never read those letters, they never reply. Like, just forget it. And you know what? 3 days later, he answered me per email. He said, like, Olga, I'm coming to Switzerland next week. Let's meet up on my very first day in Switzerland. Let's meet. So that was really amazing. It was just, again, uh, small kind of, luck that I had to in that situations that, Xapo back then in 2013. 14, they raised 40 million capital from benchmark index grayscale, like the top of Silicon Valley, and they built a product. But the problem was still the same. In America, they were basically illegal company. They had no legal status, no licenses. With banking partners was super difficult, right? They tried to do something in Hong Kong, but even in Hong Kong, you couldn't have a banking relationship. So what do you do? That was,
Call
quite
Olga.
difficult time. Yeah, well, Wences was smart. He was like, Olga is in Switzerland. She's a banker. She wants to work with stock options. Great. Let's get Olga on board. So I joined Xapo back in 2015. And yeah, that was probably one of the best things I've ever done.
What was their goal the first 6 months? What did they really need the most?
Yeah, we basically just wanted to become licensed legal company and to do what we are doing, but within the legal framework of financial institution. So Xapo back then was just about storing your private key for Bitcoin holdings, right? So
Today, Zappo is one of the largest custodians for Bitcoin. In fact, the Grayscale Investment Trust here in the United States holds all their Bitcoin at Zappo.
yeah, well, I cannot comment on individual clients, but I think it's true. It's one of the largest Bitcoin custodians, and that's why last week we heard those rumors that Xapo institutional part of Xapo business is going to be purchased by Coinbase or Fidelity for 50 million. So that's to me, to be honest, this is not very much surprising because Xapo today it has like two very different businesses, right? One is like really this vision of bringing mobile money, post national money to third world countries and empowering people. This is a very strong vision, and this is, I guess, what is driving Vences, the CEO of Xapo. And on the other side, you have this institutional business, which just kind of like developed from there. And yes, it's now there, but it's completely different business, right? You're talking to banks, funds, and to combine those two businesses in one brand is very difficult, right? In terms of marketing, branding, and so on. So I think it's a very logical step for Xapo to spin off or to sell this institutional business. But by the way,
They
I was one of the first people here to work on this too. So as a Swiss bank, the first Swiss bank to do the node on Bitcoin, they were basically also visiting me, and I was bringing them to this facility there and showing the premises and the security and the vault to convince them that they should store the Bitcoins with us. That was like, beginning of 2016. It was very early days for institutional clients for custody.
it still is.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just seeing the very bottom, the very top of the iceberg, which is gonna.
What was Crypto Valley like in Switzerland back then? Was there established regulations and laws to help for now it's easier. if you want to start a crypto company and you go to Switzerland, it's, getting a banking licenses, all these things, establishing residency. There's already preset ways to do that. Was it like that back then?
Oh, well, Charlie, it was actually quite different. It was the opposite, right? The Crypto Valley was non existent. We were, I believe, like the first three, four companies. It was Ethereum with Vitalik. He used to live here next door to our office today. There was Bitcoin Swiss, Moneta, and Xapo. We were the four company you would find here. It was actually funny. I remember the reporter from kind of Wall Street Journal of Switzerland came to write about us. And yeah, well, there were just four companies to write about in Crypto Valley, right? But on the other side, we started this conversation with Finma, which is Swiss Financial Supervisory Authority, in 2015 around summer. And it was very difficult conversation because we were trying to explain what we are doing, but we were the first company who ever talked to them about this. So their knowledge and understanding of blockchain, well, what is even Bitcoin, they learned it with us, right? We gave them like step by step educational course on what is Bitcoin and what is custody and what are private keys and what is our security and what do we want to do. And all that we wanted to do is just to be, legal company doing the storage of private keys, right? This is all basically. And then those wallets, yes, you wire us dollars or Swiss francs, and we give you Bitcoin and we store your keys. This is it. Actually simple, right? But because we were the first one, it wasn't so simple. So it was kind of like, yeah, they first started and learned and so on. But, we wanted to get licensed as financial intermediary. So this is kind of like probably comparable in US to money transmitter license, right? So we do payments. We receive
Oh yeah,
payments.
I know all about that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's actually not a big deal here to receive this license, right? But the problem was, they looked at how our storage works and at the risks, risk of this and that and hacking and oh my goodness. And then they came to the conclusion, well, you know what? Let's take the most conservative approach. And in this most conservative approach, we would be basically a bank, right? So we are not just storing the private keys. No, we are taking public deposits, right? We're taking money from you and we are like the saving bank, right? Which meant, that we need to apply for banking license. So that was the result. They told us, well, guys, you're welcome. Come here. We are happy about another company in Switzerland, but you need to apply for banking license. What would you say? Is that a great outcome?
It's the worst outcome you can get.
Right. Exactly. So, well, because in Switzerland you need 10 million minimal capital requirement to even start conversations about the bank. You need much more money for operations. You need about 100 people on the ground. So even for Xapo, who was back then still, capitalized with 40 million raised at the beginning, it was too big number, right? So and then we kind of figured out, well, guys, actually we're not a bank. Like, look at this. We're not doing anything with those bitcoins, right? They are yours. We're not even using. We're not, staking it. We're not doing anything with it. We're not leasing it.
You're holding it on behalf of other customers.
Exactly. We're just a safe box for private keys. So but they didn't see it this way, right? They were just basically, I think, from today's perspective, I think, Switzerland coming out of, bank secrecy and all the scandals about, Switzerland being destination for laundered money, all this history, like, this country just tried so hard the last 10 years to get away from this long shadow of, tax evasion and money laundering. So they wanted to be as far away as possible from anything that reminds any kind of money laundering, right?
I
So
have to say
this
that's what surprised me the most, though. What surprised me the most is that you would think Switzerland, you have this very, very, very negative stigma about Bitcoin. You have this very, 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 very um, negative stigma about Switzerland, and all of a sudden, Switzerland is one of the first countries to actually be not adopting Bitcoin, but opening its doors to it.
and you know why? I have my theory. Well, it's
Tell
more
me
than a
why.
theory. Look, I've been in private banking and wealth management, right? And you see, Switzerland was becoming the largest offshore wealth management center between the Second World War and basically beginning of 2000, 2005, 8, 9, right? So all the money of this world, I mean, it was massive. It was 10 trillion worth of assets, right, came here from all the offshore US and Asia and so on, right? But you know what happened then in around 2008 as a financial crisis stroke and US government started to look for money for bailout. They figured out, oh, you know what, where we can get money? We can get money in Switzerland of our US citizens that are, hiding there for tax purposes. So they cracked down on UBS. There was this guy who sold the data of all US clients to US government. It was a big, big, big scandal and big deal. And then basically US government pushed on Switzerland, on Swiss government, to abandon bank secrecy and give away all the client information about all US citizens, right? It was a big, big, trouble here because I mean, all the banking industry was built on this, right? It was built on this banking secrecy for 200 years, right? We used to have this bank secrecy here as a protection, as a safe jurisdiction, safe haven, right? And now this is being abandoned and ruined by Americans. This is quite a painful process that this country came through. And then the question reimagined, okay, so look, around 10% of our GDP is coming from financial services. With banking secrecy abandoned, wealth management will be much harder sell. So what should become our competitive advantage, right? And you would see from there that, a simple answer is, well, innovation, technology, right? Decentralized infrastructure for capital markets. All of this is the future of financial services. So why shouldn't we open the door for those technology innovators and create a new competitive advantage? Not tax evasion, not money laundering, not banking secrecy, technology, right? So you see, this is actually a very logical answer from like, from a state level, from the state perspective, right? Taking into account, Charlie, that Switzerland is also very strong on the technology. If you look at the international innovation rankings, Switzerland for the last 10 years was always one of the top 5 countries, right? We have here all the health tech and industry, and a lot of technology companies are still here. Switzerland is an innovation leader in technologies. So why not in banking technologies, right? It's very, logical answer, isn't it?
How is Switzerland able to do that?
Well, we created the crypto valley, right? And by the way, the Xapo example was interesting because that was one of the first cases. That was kind of like the green light, the green light to the world. Well, guys, look, if you're in crypto or Bitcoin, come to Switzerland. We want you. We will make it possible. But the backdoor story, like, the hidden story, as you call it, untold story, was actually that back then in 2015 and beginning of 2016, Finma was not very big fan of us coming here to Switzerland. Basically, at some point, They stopped so regularly communicating with us. They told us, well, guys, get a banking license, otherwise we're not talking, and this is it. And Ventus was very disappointed. He said, like, well, you know what? We're not doing the stupid banking license, and we're just abandoning Switzerland. We leave. Goodbye, Switzerland. I had enough. And I was also very disappointed because all my efforts kind of, came to nothing. And that was the moment for me where I realized, well, it's actually not about FINMA. It's not about financial regulator. This is a much bigger story, right? It's about this new competitive advantage for financial services here in Switzerland. And I was sure that, on government level, on parliament level, there are certain, political members, politicians, parliament members that understand this. So I was looking for them, and I found them. I found a group of, parliamentary members called Digital Sustainability, and this was their credo. They were, defending rights of companies in this digital space, right? And they were, supporting open source projects and so on and so on. So they invited me to Bern, to their, member session, and I was speaking about XAPO, and I told them, look, I think Finma is not getting this. It's not about money laundering. It's about the future of financial infrastructure, and we need your help. We need, you to go to the parliament and submit a motion and tell them that it's not about, getting a banking license. And first, Charlie, I thought this is very naive of me, and they will not listen, and nobody will help me. But they did. There were two parliamentary members that wrote a motion to the parliament about the changing of the banking law that,
Really?
that will not put saving of the private key in the same category as public deposit and banking category. So they suggested with this motion, I mean, I helped to write it, they suggested to exclude saving of the private keys from the banking license, right? So that you could get license to store the private keys without banking license. How amazing is that?
Is it a separate license that you need to get now, or did they just basically say you're excluded?
Exactly. So the idea was to say it's excluded. And then
Wow.
parliament, crazy, right? I couldn't believe. And look, Charlie, this is an advantage of such country as Switzerland. It's small, it's transparent. There are, so many parliamentary members. There is so much, administration and all of this. So it's very transparent, and you can have a real impact, right? You can, push some things through and be heard even in the ocean of voices, right? So they submitted a motion to the parliament, Franz Grüter, one parliament member. And, unfortunately, parliament voted, but they voted against this motion. So formally, the motion was kind of, put down. And I was disappointed. But then what actually happened is that because of the scale of this discussion, it was all in the press and, it became public. And I was talking to a lot of newspapers that all of this, public awareness, all of a sudden, people at Finma started to realize, well, that they should probably have a second look at it. And probably it's a good idea to think about it again. Even so, Parliament voted down the motion. But several months later, we were visiting office of head of FINMA, financial supervisory, and he told us basically, guys, I want to make it happen. Let's do it. And we said like, well, we've been waiting for 1.5 years. How much longer should we wait? And he said, I'm gonna make it happen in 3 months. And they did. So that was, incredible success story for Xapo, right? To be the
That opened up
first.
the door. Yeah, not just Zappo, but for all these other companies.
Exactly. Because everybody else then just followed the suit. If you do custody, well, there is already a custody case, right? So you just follow the path, right? So, and as you can imagine, for me personally, that was a big victory because you see, I have German passport. I am German citizen. I grew up in Russia, Ukraine, right? This is not my country. Yes, well, I've been here for 7 years now, but I'm not insider in political system here in Switzerland, right? And still somehow I made it happen, right? So so for me it was incredible personal victory, right? And also, it helped me to understand how powerful we can be actually. We as a startups, we as an entrepreneurs pushing the border of innovation, we have really voice here. People listen to us, authorities listen to us. We can change things, right? And you can imagine for me coming from Ukraine where, everything is corrupt. You can only pay your way into any kind of changes, right? Everything is so broken down. And for me, it was that experience to see things work in Switzerland, people having a voice, changing the legal environment, right? I was like, wow, this is amazing country. I never gonna leave. This is a country where I'm gonna work and die.
In our country, even citizens can't change things like that. You have to be in politics very high up.
Right? Yeah. So this is, I think this is one of the strongest point, and basically kind of what speaks for this country, right? Is that people and companies and even small companies can can shape the way business works, and if it's good for society and it's good for business, then there are ways that state will make it happen.
I want to understand something, right? So, the personality and character style of an individual is very telling. And the things that you grew up with and what really shaped who you are, I feel like influenced your decisions and allowed you to do things that most people, including myself, would think is impossible. Um, right? And so people talk about having a chip on your shoulder, and you mentioned it earlier. And I feel like I walk around with a chip on my shoulder as well. And I'm in this world that, because I grew up in a very religious community, a very religious Jewish community, and that was its bubble, its community. And I feel like an outsider sometimes in the non-religious community. And I walk around here and I say I feel like people think I'm a fraud, and I don't belong here. And if I fail, I have to crawl back into the hole where I came from. Do you feel that same way too sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this journey is never over, right? This is the way, your first experiences as lives, they're shaping your character and your destiny, right? And, those are the things. Strive for best results, right? Work hard. This is also kind of like, ideology and religion belief, right? So I think this is never going to change for me too. I'm very hard working person here now, after I left Xapo. I started with three other co-founders, Smart Valor. It's in the company here in Zug. We're building a platform for security tokens. So security tokens exchange for alternative investments. And now we are almost 2 years old. I never took a vacation. I work almost all of the weekends. I never leave office before 12. It's like, it's just who you are, right? And I think no matter how successful you get, this part of you is never changing, right? It's just the way who you are. And you know what? I kind of like it this way. I can't imagine me, retiring or doing nothing or doing just a little bit. Like, it's just not me. I love it. I love it, working hard. I encourage my employees also work hard, and I see, how what I do also shapes the destinies and decisions of other people around me. And that is actually quite a powerful thing, If you see people taking decisions because you shared your story or because they see how you do things, wow, I mean, that's completely different dimensions than being executive director and having direct reports, People who listen to you because you're on paper executive director. You can get there, but to really, have influence on people on a personal level, this is a real power. I hope you know what I mean.
I do, and I feel like it's what drives us a lot more than simply making money. I feel like
Absolutely.
what drives us is the wanting to have a place in this world. We want. I mean, at the end of the day, no one wants to die alone, right? No one wants to be buried in a grave that no one remembers. We want to have an established legacy. We want to say that we've contributed to society in some way or another.
Absolutely. There was a book of a lady who used to, be this person when people die, as the last person that takes care of people who are about to die in 1 or 2 weeks. And she said in this book, she wrote that, the one thing that almost everybody was, sorry about at the end of their life is the things that they did not do, that they wanted to do, but they didn't do it, right? Like so many people wanted to have, to become entrepreneur or to do something better for society, but they never found a way or the courage to do it. And then at the end of their life, they regret it, right? And I think, who was it? Jeff Bezos, I guess, the Amazon founder and CEO. He said, well, he also lived in this remorse minimization framework, right? So he just knew if he will not do Amazon and will not give it a try, he will always regret it. So in this remorse minimization framework, he just did what he believed will, reduce the feeling of, having not done something. So, and I think for me it's the same. If you think about it, like how much do we have to live? How many years, like really good productive years of our professional career do we have? Do you want to spend all this power and energy on just making money? I mean, you can do it anyway. You can do it in so many ways, right? So at some point, it doesn't become, you know, like a reason to work, right? I was very lucky to invest in Bitcoin back in 2013 and 14 and 15, and most of this I benefited from Bitcoin hitting 20,000. I sold. I invested in Bitcoin. We were the first and largest investors in our own company, Smart Valor. But to me, this is the best way to spend your savings and resources, to put it to work in something that you can make a huge success, right? So
Of course,
yeah, so this is an exciting journey that we started with Smart Valor. So we already, as I did for Xapo, I got as the same license here in Switzerland, financial intermediary, but it didn't took me 1.5 year. It took me 3 months, right? And we did everything ourselves, no lawyers, right? That's an amazing thing. And then we also got, another legal entity in Liechtenstein, that's neighboring country here. We registered their crypto to fiat exchange. And also in Liechtenstein, we are currently in the process of getting licensed as basically stock exchange. Yeah, so security trading platform. You call it in US, I guess, alternative trading,
sure.
ATS, right? Yeah, so it's a little bit even broader, right? So with this license, which is called here MTF, Multilateral Trading Facility, it's a European Union wide license. So you can, passport this into 30 European countries. So with this license, we will be able to trade securities, derivatives, options, structured products, any kind of securities or financial instruments.
Your latest project that you've been working on is Smart Valor. Tell me about the project.
So, Smart Valor is basically a security token exchange for alternative investments. In terms of products, we're looking at enabling trade not just for cryptocurrency and utility tokens, but basically for any kind of tokenized real assets, be it shares in a private company, be it shares or limited partner stake in venture capital fund, in any kind of fund, right? There can be security tokens backed by real estate, infrastructure project, and so on. And also, an interesting part of this are derivatives on cryptocurrencies. I think this is a very big area that is not even, discovered properly through legal entities, licensed exchanges. So basically, we see ourselves as a place, as a marketplace for alternative investments. So everything outside of publicly traded equity, debt, money market instruments. So everything else is actual alternative investments, right? Cryptocurrencies, all of this stuff. And I think, this alternative investment space, it suffers from illiquidity and difficulty of access to this space, because of the big stakes, because of the liquid market. So this is exactly the area where tokenization of assets holds the biggest improvement in terms of the process. It makes those investments more accessible and more liquid. So this is why we specialized on basically covering different types of alternative investments. So in terms of this is for the product, right? In terms of regulation, well, as I mentioned, we are already licensed as a financial intermediary in Switzerland and crypto to fiat exchange in Liechtenstein. And with those two licenses, we can already launch a cryptocurrency and utility tokens exchange. This is what is happening right now. So since last week, we opened for public access our exchange, Smart Valor exchange, so people can already access. You can access. I would really appreciate, Charlie, your opinion. What do you think about my exchange? I mean, it's
100%
maybe
send it over.
yeah, it's maybe not the most sophisticated in terms of trading features, right? But this is not our purpose. We don't want to compete with cryptocurrency exchanges. We're a security token exchange, right? We will make available products, that 90% of other exchanges cannot list, right? So this is where we are going. So now we're gonna another 2 weeks. There's gonna be this public access to the exchange in test environment. We're collecting feedback. People can earn Valor token within 7 categories. And then after that, probably in June, we're gonna launch the exchange. Right? That's by the way, Charlie. That's gonna be the first cryptocurrency exchange operated out of Switzerland. You will laugh, but
Congratulations.
yeah, Crypto Valley still doesn't have an exchange. It's crazy, right? Yeah, so and this is the first stage for us. We're gonna launch with top 5 cryptocurrencies and then expand the scope of cryptocurrencies traded on the platform. And at the same time, we are moving forward with MTF, with getting licensed um, for security token exchange, right? It's much more complicated. It's several legal entities that we need to build operations there for, because we want to enable also access for retail investors, for any kind of investors. So what we are actually looking here for is a great security token offering and projects. If you know somebody who is building their security token and they're looking for a venue to list, please remember it's us here in Switzerland, and this is basically Europe-wide platform. So that's one of the things on our side, and we
Olga, how can people contact you?
well, it's very simple. It's olga.feldmeier at smartvalor.com. It's my name at companyname.com, right? It's very simple.
Perfect.
Yeah, so basically, this is what's going on. We also have our own exchange native cryptocurrency, Valor. It's very similar to Binance token. We had a public sale and private sale last year, and now it's listed, I guess, on 2 exchanges, one Korean exchange, Bitstamp and BitMax, right? So people are already trading the Valor token. It doesn't even have the operations. The exchange is not live yet. It will be in several weeks, but already now we see great interest, and all of this is happening at the same time. And I'm never saying that Valor token is going to be better than Binance or give you more yield. Like, nobody knows. But I think the exchange native tokens, it's a new way to indirectly own the new financial infrastructure, right? And if folks earlier, who owns Nasdaq, who owns New York Stock Exchange? Well, banks and asset managers, right? Who owns Binance? Binance token holders, right? And they're benefiting
Yep.
from success of Binance. So I think, the way, this industry, the way of, or the form of ownership, right, is going to be very different from everything that we've seen before, right? And people who are brave enough, who are courageous enough to invest in those early projects like Smart Valor, they will see a significant rewards for this risk-taking attitude.
Olga, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was really wonderful.
You're welcome, Charlie. Thank you very much for inviting me for my untold story.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. New episodes of Untold Stories go live every Tuesday at 7 a.m. EST. Links to our Apple and Spotify channels are in the show notes. You can also follow me on Twitter, Charlie Shrem, to continue the conversation. See you next week.